I don't know the exact day it happened. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't a betrayal. There wasn't even a moment where I thought, something is wrong. It was quieter than that. One night, I was brushing my teeth, looking at myself in the mirror, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time we had talked about anything that wasn't logistical. Bills, groceries, schedules, the kind of conversations you have with someone you share rent with. That was the first time the word roommates crossed my mind. Not out loud, just a quiet thought I immediately pushed away. Her name was Lily. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. The kind where everyone sits too close together and passes plates around like they're solving a group problem. I didn't know most of the people there. I wasn't even planning to stay long. Lily was sitting across from me. She laughed easily, but not loudly. She leaned in when people spoke. She didn't check her phone every few minutes. That stood out. At some point, our eyes met while someone was telling a long story that didn't really go anywhere. She made a small face, half amused, half trapped, and I smiled back. It felt like a shared understanding. After dinner, a few of us walked to a bar. We ended up next to each other again. Conversation didn't feel forced. We talked about work first, then about where we grew up, then about how strange it is to get older and still feel like you're improvising adulthood. There was no spark I could describe, no dramatic shift in the air. There was comfort. I asked for her number without overthinking it. She gave it to me without hesitation. Our first date was coffee. Daytime. No pressure. We talked for almost 3 hours. Not in an intense, confessional way. Just steady conversation. She told me about her sister. I told her about my dad's habit of giving advice nobody asked for. When we left, I felt calm. That was the word I kept coming back to in the early months. Calm. Lily didn't make me anxious. She didn't make me guess. She didn't play games. If she liked me, she showed up. If she was busy, she said so. We built something slow. Dinners. Walks. Weekends that blended into each other. I remember lying in her bed one night, windows open, city noise drifting in, and thinking this feels sustainable. That word felt important at the time. We moved in together after almost 2 years. Not because we were rushing, because it made sense. We were already splitting time evenly between our places, already leaving clothes at each other's apartments, already discussing whose kitchen was easier to cook in. When we signed the lease, it felt like a natural progression, not a milestone we needed to celebrate loudly. Just the next step. The first few months were good. We argued about where to put the couch. We debated over dishes. We laughed about how neither of us knew how to properly assemble a bookshelf. Living together revealed habits. She needed the bed made every morning. I didn't. I left cabinet doors open. She folded laundry immediately. None of it felt threatening. It felt like intimacy. At night, we would talk in the dark. About our days. About what annoyed us. About random memories. Sometimes we would drift into silence and fall asleep mid-conversation. There was a sense of togetherness that didn't require effort. That's what I missed the most, I think. Effortlessness. Somewhere along the way, that shifted. I can't pinpoint when. It didn't happen because we stopped loving each other. It didn't happen because someone cheated or lied. It happened in smaller, less dramatic ways. The first sign was conversation. We still talked, but not the same way. I would come home from work and start telling her something, and she would nod without looking up from her laptop. Sorry, she'd say after a few seconds. What? I'd repeat myself. Sometimes I wouldn't. I'd just say, nothing. She didn't notice the difference. Or maybe she did, and didn't know what to do with it. We started eating dinner in front of the TV more often. It wasn't a big decision, just convenience. We were tired. It was easier. At first, we would comment on what we were watching. Joke about it. Pause it to talk. Later, we just watched. Silence filled the spaces that used to hold conversation. We still said, I love you. But it became automatic. Something you say before leaving for work. Something you say before bed. It didn't disappear. It just thinned. Weekends changed too. We used to plan things. Even small things. Farmers markets. Random road trips. Brunch with friends. Eventually, weekends became parallel lives in the same apartment. She would go to yoga. I would go to the gym. She would meet friends. I would catch up on work. We would reconvene at night and summarize our days in bullet points. How was yoga? Good. How was the gym? Fine. And that was it. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt like routine. Routine is quiet. It doesn't announce itself as danger. It tells you everything is stable. We stopped asking follow-up questions. That's something I noticed later. When she said work was stressful, I used to ask why. What happened? Who said what? Later, I would just nod and say, that sucks. When I said I had a bad meeting, she used to ask for details. Later, she would say, I'm sorry. No curiosity. No digging. Just acknowledgement. We still slept in the same bed. But some nights, I would lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling like there was more distance between us than the width of the mattress. We weren't fighting. We weren't unhappy in a dramatic way. We were comfortable. Too comfortable. Comfort started replacing connection. I didn't recognize it at first. I thought this is what long-term relationships look like. This is maturity. This is stability. But stability without closeness feels different. It feels like sharing space instead of sharing yourself. The realization came in the most ordinary moment possible. It was a Thursday night. I had a rough day at work. Nothing catastrophic. Just a steady accumulation of small frustrations. On the drive home, I rehearsed telling Lily about it. Not in detail, just the outline. I imagined sitting on the couch, talking it through, feeling that familiar relief of being understood. I walked in. She was at the kitchen counter, scrolling on her phone. Hey, she said without looking up. Hey. I put my bag down. She kept scrolling. I stood there for a second, waiting for the question. How was your day? It didn't come. She wasn't ignoring me. She just didn't think to ask. I went to the fridge, grabbed a drink, sat down. She eventually put her phone down and said, I'm going to shower. Okay, I said. That was it. I never told her about my day. Not because I was punishing her. Because the window felt closed. That was the first time I felt alone in the apartment. Not physically alone. Emotionally alone. It scared me, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I adjusted. I started sharing less. If something bothered me, I kept it to myself. If something excited me, I told a friend first. Not consciously. It just felt easier. Lily did the same. She started processing her stress elsewhere. On the phone with her sister. Over drinks with coworkers. I would hear her laugh in the other room. Hear her animated voice. Then she'd come back calm. Settled. Finished. I got the edited version. The summary. Not the raw feeling. We became efficient. Bills were paid on time. Chores were divided. Groceries were handled without discussion. We functioned beautifully. If someone had looked at us from the outside, they would have said we were solid. But solidity isn't intimacy. Intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires space. We had filled our space with logistics. There was a night that crystallized everything. We were both in the living room. She was on one end of the couch. I was on the other. The TV was on. Some show we had half followed for weeks. At some point, I realized I hadn't spoken in over 30 minutes. Neither had she. We were just existing in proximity. I looked at her. She looked peaceful, comfortable. I wondered if she felt the distance too. I wondered if she missed us. I didn't ask. Instead, I reached for her hand. She squeezed it absently without looking away from the screen. That small gesture broke something in me. Not because she didn't hold my hand. Because it felt automatic. Habit, not choice. I started noticing how we spoke about our future. I might apply for a new job. I'm thinking of visiting my cousin this summer. The word we appeared less often. It wasn't intentional. It just faded. One Saturday morning, I woke up early. She was still asleep. I lay there listening to her breathe and realized something that felt both obvious and unbearable. If we broke up tomorrow, our daily lives wouldn't change much. That thought sat heavy in my chest. Not because I wanted to break up. Because it meant we were already living separate emotional lives. We had become roommates. Good roommates. Respectful. Considerate. Cooperative. But roommates. The conversation, when it finally happened, was anticlimactic. We were cleaning the kitchen. I don't remember what triggered it. Maybe nothing. I said quietly, "Do you feel like we've been distant?" She paused. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe a little." I waited. "That's normal though, right?" she added. "We've been together a long time." I nodded. I wanted to say, I don't just mean less exciting. I mean less connected. But the words felt dramatic. So I said, yeah, probably. We let it go. We chose comfort over confrontation. We stayed. Months passed. The distance didn't explode. It settled deeper. We still celebrated birthdays. Still showed up to family events together. Still posted photos. Nothing looked broken. But the late-night talks never returned. The easy laughter faded. Touch became functional. A quick hug. A passing kiss. One night, she fell asleep on the couch. I watched her from the kitchen. and I felt something I didn't want to name. Relief. Relief that I didn't have to pretend to connect that night. Relief that I could just exist. That's when I knew we had crossed a line. Not in anger. In indifference. Indifference is quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It just slowly replaces effort. Eventually, she brought up the idea of space. Not dramatically. Just casually. I've been thinking about staying with my sister for a bit, she said one evening. Just to reset. My first reaction wasn't panic. It was stillness. Okay, I said. She looked at me carefully. Are you okay with that? I thought about all the nights we had spent in the same room without really seeing each other. Yeah, I said. Maybe it's good. She packed a bag that weekend. Not everything. Just enough for a week. When she hugged me goodbye, it felt familiar and distant. The apartment felt different without her. Not emptier. More honest. I didn't have to measure my silence against hers. I didn't have to wonder if I was missing something. After a week, she texted. I think I need more time. I read the message twice. I wasn't surprised. Okay, I replied. That was how it ended. Not with a fight. Not with a betrayal. With mutual recognition that what we had wasn't what we thought it was anymore. When she came back to collect the rest of her things, we moved around each other carefully. Polite. Kind. Detached. She said, I'm sorry. I said, me too. We didn't specify what for. After she left, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle. It didn't feel like devastation. It felt like confirmation. We hadn't lost each other overnight. We had slowly shifted roles. From partners to roommates. From safe places to shared addresses. Sometimes I think about where it changed. If there was a conversation we could have had earlier. If there was a moment we ignored that mattered more than we realized. But real endings don't always come with clarity. Sometimes they come with comfort. And comfort can be the most dangerous thing of all. We didn't hate each other. We didn't betray each other. We just stopped reaching. And when two people stop reaching at the same time, the distance grows quietly. Now, when I come home, the apartment feels like mine. Fully mine. There's no one on the other end of the couch. No one in the shower. No parallel life unfolding in the next room. Sometimes that feels lonely, but it feels honest. I don't think Lily and I failed dramatically. I think we drifted gently. And we didn't notice until we were already standing on opposite sides of something we couldn't name. We became roommates without noticing. And by the time we noticed, it felt normal. That's the part that stays with me. Not the goodbye. Not the boxes. The normalcy. The quiet shift from love to logistics. From connection to convenience. From us to coexistence. There was no explosion. Just erosion. And erosion, I've learned, is hard to see while it's happening. But once it's done, the landscape looks completely different. Even if nothing dramatic ever occurred. We didn't lose each other loudly. We just adjusted. Until there was nothing left to adjust. And that's how it ended. Quietly. But endings don't actually stop when someone walks out the door. They linger in the spaces they used to occupy. The first week alone felt almost organized. I rearranged small things. Moved the chair she liked closer to the window. Took the extra toothbrush out of the holder. Cleared half the closet. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. That's what we had become in the end. Practical. I expected the silence to feel heavier. Instead, it felt consistent. It matched what the apartment had already felt like for months. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. We hadn't lost something suddenly. We had been living without it for a long time. There were moments, though, when the absence caught me off guard. Reaching for a second plate before remembering. Turning to say something while cooking, only to realize there was no one in the room. Instinct doesn't update immediately. Emotion lags behind logistics. I thought about the early months again. About the way she used to sit cross-legged on the couch, leaning into me when she laughed. About how she would ask follow-up questions until I felt fully heard. About the way we would debrief our days like it was a ritual. When did that stop feeling necessary? I don't think either of us consciously decided to withdraw. It was more subtle. We stopped asking questions that required time. We stopped offering details that required patience. We started protecting our energy instead of investing it. There's a strange efficiency in long-term relationships. You assume you already know the other person. You assume you don't need to dig deeper because you've already done that work. But people don't stay still. They keep shifting. And if you don't keep reaching, you wake up next to someone who feels familiar but slightly out of reach. I remember one specific Sunday months before we ended. We were grocery shopping, walking side by side through the aisles, talking about nothing important. At some point, I looked at her, and felt like I was walking next to someone I used to be in love with. Not that I wasn't anymore, but that the feeling had changed shape. It was softer, less urgent, less electric. At the time, I told myself that was maturity, love evolving. Now I wonder if it was the beginning of indifference. Indifference doesn't feel cold at first. It feels neutral, like everything is fine. And neutrality is hard to argue with. We weren't miserable. We weren't even unhappy most days. We just weren't connected. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who ask what happened. Nothing happened. We didn't implode. We faded. I've replayed our last few months in my head more times than I'd like to admit, trying to find a moment where I could have interrupted the drift. Maybe when I stopped telling her about my stressful days. Maybe when she stopped venting to me first. Maybe when we chose separate plans over shared ones too many weekends in a row. But hindsight is cleaner than reality. In the moment, everything felt manageable, temporary, fixable, and there's always a tomorrow. Until there isn't. I think about the night she said she needed space. How calm I felt. How the word space sounded almost relieving. Not because I wanted distance. Because the distance was already there. It just finally had a name. There's something humbling about realizing you stayed in something that was already gone. Not out of devotion. Out of inertia. Inertia is powerful. You wake up. You go to work. You come home. You repeat. Days blur. And you convince yourself that routine equals stability. But routine can also hide absence. I don't blame her. And I don't blame myself entirely either. We both chose ease over effort. We both let silence grow. We both assumed the other person would notice first. That's the strange thing about becoming roommates in your own relationship. There's no villain, no clear failure, just mutual withdrawal. Sometimes I wonder if she felt the same quiet loneliness I did. If she lay awake some nights staring at the ceiling, feeling the space between us expand. If she noticed when I stopped reaching for her hand first. If she told herself the same story about normalcy and maturity. I'll never know. And maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is what I understand now. That intimacy requires maintenance. Not grand gestures. Not constant intensity. But small, consistent curiosity. Asking one more question. Staying 5 minutes longer in a conversation. Not letting convenience replace connection. We let convenience win. It was easier to scroll than to ask. Easier to summarize than to unpack. Easier to coexist than to confront discomfort. And coexistence is deceptively calm. After she left, I started noticing my own habits. How quickly I retreated into silence when I felt unsure. How often I chose not to bring something up because it felt inconvenient. That wasn't just about her. That was about me. I participated in the drift. I stopped reaching too. Maybe because I was afraid she wouldn't reach back. Maybe because I didn't want to risk rejection in my own living room. It's strange how you can be brave at work, with friends, in public, and yet feel cautious in the place that's supposed to be safest. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret the years we spent together. But I regret how long I ignored the shift. How I minimized my own discomfort because it didn't seem dramatic enough. I've learned that not all endings are explosive. Some are administrative. You divide furniture. You change passwords. You update your address. And emotionally, you've already been adjusting for months. There are nights now when I sit on the couch and let the silence settle. It's different from before. Before, the silence felt shared but separate. Now it feels singular, clear. Sometimes I miss having someone in the next room. Not Lily specifically, just the idea of shared presence. But I don't miss feeling like a background character in my own relationship. I don't miss waiting for questions that didn't come. I don't miss rehearsing conversations I never had. I think that's how I know it was time. Not because it was unbearable, because it was empty. We became roommates without noticing. And by the time we noticed, it felt ordinary. That's the part that unsettles me most. How ordinary disconnection can feel. How you can look stable and be drifting. How you can say, I love you, and mean it in a way that's already fading. I don't know what Lily tells people about us. Maybe she says we grew apart. Maybe she says the timing wasn't right. Maybe she says nothing at all. What I know is this. We didn't lose each other in a moment. We lost the habit of reaching. And without that, love doesn't collapse. It just quietly rearranges itself into something else. Something manageable. Something polite. Something that looks fine from the outside. Until one day you realize you're sharing a lease, not a life. And by then, it already feels normal. That's what I carry with me now. Not heartbreak. Not anger. Just awareness. Of how easy it is to drift. Of how quiet erosion can be. of how dangerous comfort becomes when it replaces curiosity. We became roommates without noticing. And the hardest part wasn't the goodbye. It was realizing how long we had already been gone. I used to think breakups were supposed to feel like a collapse, like something inside you caves in, like you can't breathe, like your body knows before your mind does that something is over. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like standing in a room that had been slowly emptying for months, and only now realizing no one else was there. Not shock, not devastation, just a dull, steady awareness. The kind that doesn't spike, the kind that settles. After a while, I stopped telling people we had broken up. If they asked, I'd say, we're not together anymore. That felt more accurate. Breaking implies force. This wasn't force. This was release. There are still small moments that catch me. Not big ones. Not anniversaries or holidays or obvious reminders. It's quieter than that. I'll be washing dishes and realize I'm only setting one mug out to dry. I'll hear a song we used to play in the car and notice I don't reach to turn it up anymore. I'll come home after a long day and feel relief that I don't have to decide whether I should talk about it or keep it to myself. That last one always surprises me, because for a long time, I thought wanting to be alone meant something was wrong with me. Now I understand it meant I didn't feel accompanied. There's a difference. Being alone feels empty sometimes. Being lonely next to someone feels heavier. I think about the version of us that existed in the beginning, the one that stayed up too late talking, the one that noticed small changes in each other's moods, the one that treated sharing as instinct, not effort. I don't feel bitterness toward that version. I feel tenderness. We were real. We just weren't permanent. And I don't think that makes any of it meaningless. It just makes it human. People grow. People shift. Sometimes they grow in the same direction. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes no one does anything wrong. Sometimes nothing explodes. Sometimes no one cheats. Sometimes no one lies. Sometimes you just stop choosing each other in 1,000 tiny ways. And eventually, you become two people who know each other's habits, but not each other's inner worlds. Roommates. I've been paying closer attention to myself lately. To when I feel open. To when I feel guarded. To when I want to share something, and when I instinctively pull it inward. I don't judge those moments anymore. I just notice them. I'm trying to learn what it feels like to be present without bracing. To speak without rehearsing. To say, this is heavy, without apologizing for it. I don't know who I'll become next. I don't know who I'll love next. I don't know if I'll recognize the moment when something starts to change again. But I know this. I don't want to wake up years from now and realize I've been living beside someone instead of with them. I don't want to confuse routine for intimacy. I don't want to confuse stability with closeness. I don't want to ignore the quiet parts anymore. Because the quiet parts are where most endings live. We became roommates without noticing. Not because we didn't care. Not because we didn't try at all. But because trying became optional. Because reaching became inconvenient. Because we assumed love could survive on memory alone. It can't. Love needs motion. Even slow motion. Even clumsy motion. It needs to be fed. We stopped feeding it. And it didn't die dramatically. It just went still. Sometimes I wonder if Lily ever thinks about that too. If she ever notices moments where she almost texts me something and then doesn't. If she ever stands in her kitchen and feels a familiar absence she can't quite name. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. I don't need to know. What I know is this. I'm not angry. I'm not heartbroken in the way movies show. I'm not waiting for closure. I'm just carrying a quiet understanding. About how easy it is to drift. About how subtle disconnection can be. About how love doesn't always end. Sometimes it just changes shape until it no longer resembles what you need. We became roommates without noticing. And by the time we did, it felt normal. That's the part that stays with me. Not the goodbye. Not the empty apartment. Not the last box carried out the door. But the realization that something important can fade without ever announcing itself. And that paying attention might be the most important form of love there is. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. Quietly. Before everything turns into silence.